drawings from back in the day, medieval ages. This was a very common, type of job, type of work. It's called a dyer. Over here, a person in this basket has plain white wool or cotton, probably wool, and they dye it all different types of colors. It's not very common today. Today, it's mostly done by machine. A machine could do it a lot better, a lot faster, a lot more economical than any human could ever will. It's mainly done by machine today. We have better types of dyes today, ones that stay in clothes, ones that don't fade. But it was a special type of art called dyeing. Matter of fact, one of the 39 melachos, one of the 39 on Shabbos things you're not allowed to do is tzeveya, dyeing. They would take wool and linen, wool, and they would make it different colors for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle in the Beis HaMikdash, purple, red, different colors. Here looks a little bit more contemporary times, looks to be like the 1800s, how they would do it. The contemporary equivalent of dyeing today would be painting. Painting is much more common today with all the different shades of paint. People don't want to have just plain walls. In the olden days, most people, besides for the wealthy, would just put a layer of plaster. But nowadays, there's paint. And if you ever see a painter, there's many painters in the community, and their hands are always looking sort of like this. You can see their hands over here. You earn 5% back over here. Their hands looking something similar to this. Here are dyers, probably in the times of the Gemara, looks something more like this. You see they have plain white bolts of whatever material or cloth it is, and here they're making it different colors. There's, if you look at a painter nowadays, their hands will look probably something more like this.
That looks like what's it, Gordon?
Yitzchok Gordon's hands, very good.
Yeah.
I get to see Yitzchok Gordon most days of the week in the mornings, and it's a very common, normal thing that their hands are looking just like this. For me and you, maybe, we're not used to seeing such hands because we don't usually deal with such materials. But for somebody like him, somebody who's a painter, or back in the day, someone who's a dyer, their hands, their clothes, their whole body would be full of all different types of colors of paints. Now, we're just here's just another example I brought up. Here's another example I brought up. Imagine this person wasn't wearing gloves. I don't think they had gloves, disposable gloves, elastic plastic gloves, rubber gloves. I don't think they had that back in the day. And people would use their hands.
They come from different herbs and the dyes itself.
Dyes itself, there's a whole list of herbs. Some come from herbs, some come from rocks, stones, rocks that are ground very finely. Mainly come from, I think, vegetative things. Mesechta Brachos speaks about different types of inks that could be used for mezuzos and for Sefer Torah. We've had over here in the Megillah even a discussion of a few different, some came from sea urchins, dyes from bloods of different creatures. The dyes came from all different types of ways. You know, I think back in the day they had experiment, how do you say, try and fail, trial and error. That's the way they found the different dyes. But yes, people's hands were dirty. And we're just learning now the halachas of someone who had a deformity in their body, someone who's blind, someone who, with other examples that we brought before, we're going to bring some more examples, someone who has a mum, someone who's missing a hand. During the blessing, the Birchas Kohanim, everyone is looking towards a Kohen. Although you should cover your eyes, correct, but at least in the beginning, when they're saying the blessing, people will be looking at the Kohen. And a Kohen's hands are lifted up, they're on display, and so it could be an issue that if you see hands that have a mum. In the Holy Temple in the Beis HaMikdash, they were very, very strict to make sure nobody had a mum. How about a mum is a blemish, which would disqualify someone from serving in the Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan? Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, when he got older and he was having issues with his heart, and the doctors wanted to put in a pacemaker into his heart, and he made a lot of halachic research. Is a pacemaker, which is inside the body, completely hidden, is it considered to be a mum, a blemish in the body, or not?
Well, he wasn't a Kohen, though.
He wasn't a Kohen, but he says when Mashiach comes, Mir Hashem, very soon, and there's going to be a Sanhedrin. And one of the conditions for a member of Sanhedrin is that they cannot have a mum, not a blemish. And the Sanhedrin, which is going to be from our generation, I could assume that Moshe Feinstein will probably be as part of that Sanhedrin. He'll be a member of that Sanhedrin. So he wanted to know, is a pacemaker considered to be a mum? He actually made a lot of halachic research on that matter. I think the answer was that it's not a mum, but he went through all the angles of it, because although it's hidden, but you can't live without it, so maybe it makes him a treifa, which is also an issue. So what's a halachic gather of a treifa? You have to make an incision to get there. How visible is an incision? Is an incision in a place which is visible when you're wearing clothes? I mean, it was a whole halachic question.
Rabbi, if you're missing teeth, is that a mum?
If
you're missing teeth.
Yeah. Is that a mum? It's a good question. I don't think it's a mum. I don't think it's one of the ideas of a mum. Right? It's something else, considered a limb that can't grow back, but I don't think it's a mum.
Rabbi language in the Kollel, this week she was giving a lecture as far as medical halacha. I had actually come up with an interesting question, and I had said someone could be dead and he's revived, right? But it would be like, let's say, an hour or whatever.
So it's
actually 50 years later, right?
It's a long discussion. I think we'll talk about that on the way home. We'll talk about after. Okay.
What happened there?
Exactly. So these are things which will be discussed today. Could a Kohen who is blind, he wouldn't be allowed to be serving in the Beis HaMikdash? He wouldn't be giving the blessing of Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash. Could he do Berchas Kohanim? In Shul, could he bless the Kohanim? A Kohen who hasn't taken a bath in a month or a year, that type of Kohen for sure cannot serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Yeah, smelly or dirty. So if you have a Kohen who's a dyer, someone over there who's consistently.
Pinky, your son's on the phone.
Someone who's consistently, their hands are dirty, could they be considered could they do in Shul the blessing of Kohanim? When the Kohanim give the blessing in Shul, is it on the same caliber as one who's serving in the Beis HaMikdash? So let's read the Gemara and the Mishnah inside. The Mishnah of Dalel and Beis, 24b. This is the first Mishnah of 2 on the page. The Nishmas Rabbi Yitzchok ben Meir.
So this is 24b1?
Be 24b1 if you have a Mishnah there, correct?
Okay.
Kohen sheyesh biyadav mumen. A Kohen whose hands are blemished. What that means, blemished? It means the Gemara will explain what that means. Lo yisas kapav. He should not do birchas kohanim. He should not bless the kohanim. He should not do the blessing of the kohanim, which blesses the people, because people will see his hands, as will be explained soon. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Af mi shahayu yadav tzevuos satim." Even somebody whose hands are stained with a bluish dye similar to tcheles. That's what, and Rashi says over here that it's actually a red type of dye, istis upua, a red dye made out of roots. But at any rate, the Kohen, it's not exclusively this color, but they were just using the common type of dye that was used in those days. Lo yisas kapav. He should not do birchas kohanim. He should not bless the people with the blessing of the kohanim. The reason for both of these, a Kohen who has a deformity on his hand, or a Kohen which his hands are stained with a different stain, which today would mean a Kohen whose hands are dirty with paint, he should not be the one to do Berachas Kohanim. And the reason for both of them is because since he looks different than everyone else, therefore people will be looking at him. What's the problem if everybody looks at him? It could be one of two issues. Some say that it's not respectful for everyone to be looking at a Kohen whose hands are dirty. But if you want to have a representative, have to be somebody who's looking respectful, right? If you come to if you're giving a job interview to someone and the person shows up out of breath, with disheveled clothing, look like they're just rubbing their eyes coming out of bed, and they're coming to your job interview, chances are they won't give a favorable impression. So here you're giving a blessing from Hashem to the people. You have to be holding, you have to look very, very respectful.
Excuse me, I have a question on, two questions. One, I assume the Kohen had his hands underneath the tallis. And two, I assume the Yidden were not looking at him, but were under a tallis themselves. So if that's the case, why, it sounds like it's a moot discussion. Nobody's looking at him.
Very good, a good question. Let's open the Gemara Chagiga to answer your question. Chagiga. Here it is, Chagiga. Okay, let's look at the Gemara here in Chagiga. Here, Kol Mestakel, the Arba Dvarim, Roi Lo Shlei Ba Lo'olam. Whoever looks at four different things, it is better that they would have not ever been born. What are they? And where's this? I'll just find the page. Hamistakel. Here, Hamistakel. So one of them is a rainbow. One of them is a leader of a Kohen. Kohanim, the Kohanim. Why should you not look at the Kohanim when you're doing the Berachas Kohanim? It says, Hashem told Moshe, you will give from your greatness unto them. Hamastaka b'Kohanim is man shebeis hamikdash kayim. One who would look at the Kohanim during the time when they would give the blessing and they would say Hashem's name. And at that point, the Shechina says, where's the word? Shechina Shayda al Yedayim. The Shechina is on their hands. And therefore, we should not be looking at the Kohanim when the Shechina is on their hands. And it says that if you look at the Kohanim during the time of the blessing, one can get blinded because you're looking straight at the light of the Shekhinah. So then, if so, how does that fit with our Gemara, our mission over here, which says that you cannot, that people look at the Kohanim when they're making the bracha? So if we look at this over there, he says, during the times of the Beis HaMikdash, Bizman sheBeis HaMikdash Chaim. At the time of the Beis HaMikdash, Tosfos says you weren't allowed to look at the Kohanim when they're giving the blessing. But nowadays, you are allowed to look at the Kohanim when they give the blessing, because the Shekhinah is not on their hands anymore.
How come nobody does that?
So that's why doesn't anybody do that? Another reason, if a person looks at a Kohen at his hands, if they're dirty, it could be the Kohen won't have kavana. Imagine someone's giving you a dirty look. Who's this guy? You're looking at you dirty. Are you going to feel feelings of love to that person? Probably not at that moment, maybe later on. The blessing of the Kohanim is Mevarech es Amo Yisrael be'ahava. You have to bless the people with love. With love. They can't be upset at anybody while they're giving the bracha. You have to have proper kavanah when you're giving the bracha. Now, therefore, if someone looks at the Kohanim when they have dirty hands, right? If they're dirty, they're not going to give a proper kavana. Now, it turns to Haruch, he's over here on the side of many Gemaras, he adds on that although the Shechina is not on the hands of the Kohanim the way it was in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, but he uses an interesting term, a term that we use, it says about Mashiach. Right now, he's Mashkiach min hachaloimis, meitis min hacharakim. He's peeking out from the cracks and through the windows. So in the cracks between the Kohanim's hands and the openings, so over there, the Shechina is peeking out from. So therefore, we still can look at the hands of the Kohanim, because it might not be the same level of revelation, but still Hashem is peeking there. Another one of the Balei Tosfos, his name is Rebbe, he says that it's a gzeira, a decree since the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Since in the Beis HaMikdash, we couldn't look at the hands of the Kohanim, therefore now we shouldn't look at the hands of the Kohanim either. Many places, as a matter of fact, have a custom that the Kohanim cover their hands. But that's brought down from the Beis Yosef, and he says some places have a minhag to do it, but which sounds like it wasn't a common custom back then. Since the Kohanim cover their hands, it's not a problem for sure if they have a mum, if their hands are dirty, or any of these things today. Now there's a Das Torah. You ever heard of the sefer called Das Torah? It's a sefer that came out recently in Eretz Yisrael. And he has he brings all the opinions about this idea. Could you look at the Kohanim's hands today? So he brings a few different things, which I'll bring a few points of it. One of them is that you can't look at the Kohanim's hands because you're standing in front of a king. Shemona Esrei. Do you look up at the front or you look down at your siddur?
Look down at the siddur.
Correct. You don't look up. You don't look around during Shemona Esrei to see what's going on. So same thing, Birchas Kohanim, you have to be there. I've heard from two different people. One of them happened to him, one of them to someone else that he knows, that, the Rebbe would, during the blessing of Kohanim, the Rebbe had a bima in the front of the shul, and the Rebbe would go down from his bima, and all the Kohanim go up onto the Rebbe's bima. And there are a few people who were under the talus of the Rebbe during Birchas Kohanim, so I heard this from two different times, kids who would, be very jumpy and runny. And the Rebbe walked down to where other people are standing, and so they would be by the Rebbe. They would go under the Rebbe's talus. And so two different times, during the entire Birchas Kohanim, the Rebbe had tears streaming down his cheeks. From beginning to end, Birchas Kohanim. I'm not sure if any of you know the Berkowitz family from Detroit. Berkowitz from Detroit.
We didn't meet actually Rabbi Berkowitz from the Kollel.
I don't think they're related. Rabbi Berkowitz is a Chabad from Detroit. His he himself is about Tshuva. Matter of fact, one of his children put on tefillin with his grandfather the first time in his life.
Oh, wow.
In his 80s. He never pushed his father to get involved in Yiddishkeit, although him and his children are all shluchim all over the world, etc. And so one of the Berkowitz boys, he was 13 years old. He came to 770 for Yom Tov. First time ever being Tishrei in 770, and it's time for the Kohanim to go up, do the Brach of Kohanim. And as he comes up, he's a 13-year-old boy, he's lost, and it's extremely packed shul in a big way. And he's looking for someone to lend him a talis. It's not like other shuls which have many talisim on the shelves. Looking for somebody to lend him a talis to use for Birchas Kohanim. And as he's looking around for a talis, do you have a talis? Do you have a talis? And the Rebbe walked down from his place to walk to where other people are for Birchas Kohanim. And the 13-year-old boy, who was a Kohen, needs a talis. The Rebbe took off his talis and started handing it to the boy. So other people saw that, he jumped and we have a talis for you, we have a talis for you. Right, but the Rebbe was going to give his own talis to a 13-year-old boy.
By the way, that was one of the miracles that occurred in 770, because a bakr you didn't know, never saw before, would come up to you and say, "Can I have your talis?" And you would give it to him. And then you just gave your talus. It looks like every other talus, and the bucker looks like every other bucker. And you thought, am I going to get the talus back again? And somehow Taka, the bucker, found you in all this crowd and gave you your own talus back. So it was a pretty miraculous.
I didn't know about that miracle. I thought people just gave their talus and it was a 50-50. You walked home with 8 talus. Booze, you don't know.
That could be clothes, shirts, jackets, ties, coats. You go to the mikveh, and who knows what you're wearing when afterwards.
So that Torah brings down the different pirushim, but he brings down what it says in the Medrash that someone who looks at the Kohanim during Birchas Kohanim, your eyes become dim, the eyesight becomes weaker. The Mishnah Brura, Chaim, he writes the halacha. The reason you should not look at the Kohanim during the bracha, during the blessing, in order that you shouldn't take their kavana away from the bracha. And if you look at them too much, you might come to be taking your mind off from the bracha. And in order to be Zecher LaMikdash, to remember the Beis HaMikdash, you really shouldn't be looking at the Kohanim. So it comes out from the Mishnah Brura that there's nowadays, not during the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there's no real isser, no real prohibition to look at the Kohanim's hands during the bracha, during Birchas Kohanim. We don't do it for different reasons. So if somebody looked for a moment, it's not the end of the world.
Baruch Hashem, I think it happened actually, one or two times that I accidentally saw, no, I really only saw the talus, so really don't have to do it.
Because of this reason that nowadays, everyone, even a Kohen who has a blemish, a mum on his hand, missing something in their hand, even a Kohen which hands are, let's say, dirty, they're a painter, they're allowed to do Birchas Kohanim even today. The Beis Yosef brings down, that was a minhag, that was a custom in Egypt, in Mitzrayim. There are some places where the Kohen doesn't cover their hands, and that's fine as well. The Alter Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch that it's better the Kohen shouldn't cover their hands during the bracha, because you don't want to have, since the Shechina is between their fingers, right? Between their fingers, as we said, it's peaking. You don't want to put a talus between you and the Shechina, so they shouldn't cover their hands. And that's what we do, is that they'll hold their hands up at the edge of a talus. They have a talus and it's covering their face, but their hands are up in the air, and you could see their actual hands if you would be looking up. The Minchas Elazar, you've heard of him, Munkatcher Rebbe?
Yeah.
Munkatcher Rebbe, he writes that according to Kabbalah, it's better the Kohanim's hands should not be covered during the bracha, as well as one of the Kisrei Arizal, one of the Talmidim, the students of the Rizal, also writes the same thing. So everyone has their own minhag. So if you follow out the Rebbe, you should not cover your hands. But for example, when I was in Yerushalayim in Yeshiva, all the Kohanim covered their hands during Birchas Kohanim. They do it there every single day, and that's fine. That's a minhag of Yerushalayim. I was once in one of the Chabad house of one of my relatives for Rosh Hashanah, and somebody came to shul for the first time that Rosh Hashanah, and they were a Kohen. And it was exciting because they didn't always have a Kohen in shul, or the ones who were a Kohen or unfortunately intermarried, you couldn't give them an aliyah of Kohen. So it was very exciting, that finally you have 2 Kohanim in shul. And so he realized it as Musaf is starting. So the shliach, the rabbi, tells him, "You're the Kohen. You're special. I can't explain to you everything now. Just follow what I tell you to do. Make the Spock handshake. You know what that is? A Spock handshake, which is like this, right? What's a Spock handshake? He says, what was the name of the actor of the Spock handshake?
Leonard Nimoy.
Leonard Nimoy, right? He grew up going to shul in Boston, right?
He's playing as an alien.
They covered their hands. They had the talus over their hands.
Where? Yeah. So you have the famous Spock handshake.
He said he was an alien from outer space. You see him? He came up with it because of being.
And he said when he was a child, he would go to shul and he would peek under the talus. He would see the Kohanim with their hands, And that's how he would see the way they kept their hands, and that's why he came up with such a handshake. So he told them to do the Spock handshake and repeat what I tell you. They did the Birchas Kohanim that way. Fine. Let's continue with the Gemara. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, Mumin Sha'amru, when a Kohen has a blemish that would disqualify, a bodily blemish, disqualify from giving a bracha to the people, it's specifically if it is found b'panav yadav v'raglav, on their face, their hands, and their feet. But a blemish, which is a bodily blemish, which is not in one of in a place that can be visible to everyone else, that's not an issue, since it's not visible to anyone else. Now, why the feet? Because it was a custom that most people would not wear socks, right? Back in those days. It's called ampelois. In place like today, nowadays, with the minhag is people do wear socks. So then you have to wear it. It's part of tznius. But back then, when the custom was that they wouldn't, and perhaps even in Eretz Yisrael, many places don't, where it's hot. So then a Kohen takes off his shoes during the blessing of the Kohanim. They remove their shoes. And then if they have a blemish, something, a disformity in their foot, people would be staring at it. Amar Rebbe Shua ben Levi, says Rebbe Shua ben Levi. He's going to list off several different disqualifications that a Kohen can have on their hand, which could disqualify him from making a bracha in their hands.
Anything on his feet, his foot?
Yeah, we'll discuss with the feet, but any disqualifications in their foot would disqualify them from making a bracha in the Beis HaMikdash. Nowadays, every Kohen could do Birchas Kohanim. Physical blemishes don't stop someone from being able to give a bracha. If they're in a wheelchair, right? If they have a cast, they can still give a blessing today. Because, right, but in times of the Beis HaMikdash, it would be disqualified. Disqualifications would be if they married someone they're not supposed to marry, or if there are other things like that.
My question is, why are we more lenient nowadays?
Because it's not an avodah, it's not a service in the Beis HaMikdash, and we're doing it zecher l'mikdash, to remember the Beis HaMikdash. So it's not being as it's a remembrance, the level of obligation is less. So if we have a leeway to make it more lenient, you could. So here the Kohanim are covering their face, or covering their hands. You're wearing socks, your feet are covered. So there's more reason to be lenient.
So why are we, if the Kohen intermarries, actually, why are we
Strict?
Strict, because in others, no Jew is allowed to intermarry.
Correct.
So why are we
More strict with the Kohen than somebody else?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. So for an Aliyah in the Torah, you could be more lenient for Yisrael, but for Kohen, to get that Aliyah of Kohen, you have to be holding on the caliber of a Kohen, and to do the special things a Kohen does. Someone who's more special, right? You have to be more strict with them, of course. We'll do the idea. Rabbi Shua ben Levi, he lists a few disqualifications that a person could have on their hands. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, Yadav bayakonius. If a person's hands are polka dotted, they're spotted, which means from a disease. Like some people can have whatever disease where their hands have many small little dots in it, looking almost frostbitten. Lo yisas kapav. He's not allowed to do the Birchas Kohanim because his hands are blemished. Tanya nami hachi. It was taught similarly in a brisa. Yadav be'akoniyos lo yisas kapav. If a Kohen's hands are spotted, polka dotted, he's not allowed to do Birchas Kohanim. Akumos, if one's hands are bent. Akushos, if one's hands are bent to the side. Lo yisas kappa, if he should not do Birchas Kohanim. So if one's hands are deformed in a very strong way to the side or backwards, The Ran says is a little bit different, that his hands are webbed, like a webbed hands, that the skin grows together and it can't be separated. They cannot do Birchas Kohanim because people look at them and it's not respectful, or if somebody has a webbed hand and you're looking at them, you keep on looking at them, you're not focusing on the bracha, the blessing of the Kohanim. For all these reasons, you shouldn't do it. But because of that, nowadays, if it's a person, we'll get to this soon in the Gemara, who everyone is familiar with, right? My sister had in her high school class a girl who had a webbed hand, meaning she didn't have fingers on one of her hands. She only had a little tiny thumb, and then one finger for the rest of her hand, one thick finger, meaning her fingers never grew apart. And that happened as a result of a disease or something. But she was just a regular, normal girl, and no one even looked at it twice. When someone sees her for the first time, she might have become more self-conscious about it. So nowadays, if you're used to it, and doesn't even look abnormal, it's a normal thing to see, then it's totally fine, and it's not an issue at all. Midaraisa from the Torah, you're allowed. A Kohen is actually allowed to do Birchas Kohanim, because Birchas Kohanim, blessing of Kohanim, is not one of the avodas, services in the Beis Hamikdash, like bringing a korban, bringing a sacrifice. It's more of a bracha, blessing, and midaraisa from the Torah, a Kohen is allowed to actually, even if he has a deformity, a blemish, would be allowed to do it in the Beis Hamikdash. It's midarabanan. To begin with, it's a rabbinical thing that the only Kohen who's allowed to bless the people is a Kohen who doesn't have a mum. Being as it's the Rabbanan, so nowadays there's a lot more room to be lenient if a Kohen does have a deficiency or deformity today, that you could be much more lenient.
There's actually nowhere in the Torah doesn't talk about a deformity, disqualifying
From Birchas Kohanim. Of course, it talks about deformities disqualifying from everything else.
Yes.
From serving the Beis Hamikdash. But if a Kohen was not doing the service in the Beis Hamikdash that day, could still give the blessing. And that was a common thing in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, right? Because sometimes they would use a skeleton crew of 21 Kohanim a day. But you could have a few hundred Kohanim giving the bracha that day. But the fact that a Kohen cannot have a mum is a d'Rabbanan, according to the Marsha at least. So therefore, you're allowed to be lenient. Otherwise, like this, that the brisa we learned in the Gemara, it's only the hands and the feet and the face, the visible parts of the body, the blemish is an issue, but everywhere else is not an issue. If it's deraisa, if it's from the Torah doesn't differentiate where it is on your body, right? They would check a Kohanim for every blemish all over their body. So the whole idea is more of a Rabbanan. It's a rabbinical enactment that anyone who's puzzle, any Kohen who's invalid to do a service in the Beis Hamikdash, it says in Parashas Amor, like all the 201 invalid things which can make a person invalid. So the Rabbanan said that it should also be for those who are doing Birchas Kohanim. You can understand, because an average Kohen didn't really get to serve in the Beis Hamikdash too often, correct? Right. We're going to go through some more examples in Gemara. A Kohen who mispronounces words, could he say Birchas Kohanim? A Kohen who stutters, could they do Birchas Kohanim because they're saying the blessing? And we'll get through this all together. All right, we'll continue with that tomorrow. It's 11:52. I guess the rest of this week we'll be discussing more the introduction of Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. I've been looking for the Sefer online. I'll probably have to go to Yitzhak Chachma. Let me just give you one example, one difference, how the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch expands to regular Shulchan Aruch. So here, the Alter Rebbe, right? Everyone recognizes the drawing of the Alter Rebbe.
Yep.
The Alter Rebbe was tasked by his teacher, the Maggid of Mizrich, his Rebbe, to write entire Shulchan Aruch. What's wrong with the Shulchan Aruch we had until now? Shulchan Aruch means a set table. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, he would usually copy the language from previous poskim, from the Rishonim, from the early commentators, and he would usually decide what the halacha is, and then he would copy it from there. And therefore, if you would change a letter from the original text or source, there's a reason for it. And Alter Rebbe had his very exact reasoning, and certain people, Rabbi Ashkenazi from Kfar Chabad and other people, who would go deep into the Alter Rebbe's reasonings and learn from letters, and the Rebbe would encourage them to do it. As the Alter Rebbe would copy from other Rishonim and Achronim, Alter Rebbe would give a source on the side. Many times, even the source Alter Rebbe gives, you could learn from there. If there's two sources say the same thing, the Alter Rebbe chose one over the other, there's a reason for it. Throughout all generations, the great Gedolim, the great Rabbanim would always learn the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. They would call it the Shulchan HaMelech, the Shulchan Aruch of the king. And the son to the Alter Rebbe says how he went into depth. The main thing of the Alter Rebbe over the previous Shulchan Aruch is milsa b'taimei, to give a reason to the halacha. Right, Alter Rebbe he wrote on the entire Shulchan Aruch, but the vast majority of it was actually destroyed in fires, different fires over the years, long for whatever the the history of that is. So I'll give you one example. Here's a Shulchan Aruch. I'm trying to find it in English. I'm sure it's there, but for what we're learning over here, it's not so important to have the English even over here. So here is a regular Shulchan Aruch written by Rabbi Yosef Cairo in the mid to late 1500s. Chametz shelakum, chametz of a non-Jew, she'avar lava Pesach, which Pesach was owned by a non-Jew over Pesach, mutter afilu bahana. Achila is allowed to be, you can have benefit over it, you can eat it because it was owned by a non-Jew. Hence the custom to sell our chametz to a non-Jew. However, chametz shel Yisrael she'avar lava Pesach, chametz, which belonged to a Jew over Pesach, osur b'hana, you're not allowed to have any benefit from it. You definitely can't eat it. You can't even have benefit from it. Even if a Jew owned chametz over Pesach, even if it was left there by accident, or even if they forgot about it, or they had no choice in the matter, still, any chametz owned by a Jew over Pesach is forbidden to have any benefit from after Pesach. And now he goes to the next halacha. If it was sold to a non-Jew, it's fine. If it was gifted to a non-Jew, it's fine, etc. The Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, let's look at the same exact thing. Chametz dag and gomer, it's on the screen. If you have complete chametz, shel Yisrael of a Jew, she'avar lava Pesach, which a Jew owned over Pesach, bein she'avar lava kol Pesach, bein shelo avar lava mitzvah Pesach, whether he owned it the whole Pesach or only part of Pesach, afilu mixas yontav achron shel galias, even if he only owned it for part of the last day of Pesach, of even if Chutz La'aretz, of the 9th day of Pesach, 8th day of Pesach, it's forbidden for any Jew to benefit from it. So already the Alter Rebbe added on a few details. Even if he owned it for a part of Pesach, even if it's only Pesach outside of Eretz Yisrael. And now the reason given, the Shulchan Aruch didn't give the reason. Why? The rationale is that the sages gave a penalty to the one who owns the chametz. He went against the mitzvah of the Torah of not seeing or owning any chametz. And truthfully should only be forbidden for that person who owned the chametz. So if one person owned chametz over Pesach, one Jew, it should be forbidden for that person, but other Jews should be allowed to benefit. However, since the sages didn't want people to start playing games, not sell their chametz, own chametz over Pesach, and give it to someone else to eat afterwards. Therefore, they said any Jew, no Jew can have benefit from any chametz owned by any Jew over Pesach. More than that, Onus shloim yoch levada shloyach lidei menu klal lachar Pesach after became a suba no they sheniach called them kimtzei lachar Pesach yom honest. And even it was completely beyond his control, for whatever reason he couldn't get rid of his chametz. I don't know. He was in prison. He couldn't get rid of his chametz. Who knows? Still, they said that a person that chametz is forbidden after Pesach, and because otherwise people would start leaving their chametz after Pesach. Say, oh, it was circumstances beyond my control. So first of all, the Alter Rebbe added several halachas to what it says in Shulchan Aruch. Alter Rebbe brings a reason the Gemara gives for the prohibition of owning chametz over Pesach and why no Jew could have benefited. Alter Rebbe also brings a reason of the Rambam and the reason of the Ran, different Rishonim. Right, the reason why it's also forbidden if it's beyond his control, and the reason of the Ran why it's forbidden for every single person, not just that one. And there's many examples you could bring. So Alter Rebbe, he brings the reasons and he brings all the Rishonim inside in a very seamless, flawless way. In times, in cases when there's more depth, Alter Rebbe would sometimes make what's called the Kuntres Achrein, which is a in-depth footnote on this. Very deep, very in depth. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch was always in the first row of whatever any Jew would have halachas for him. However, it's such an important sefer, Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, but in today's generation, for many people, it's sort of a closed book. Because the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, which he wrote with great inspiration and Ruach HaKodesh and perfection, which from the times in the Rambam, we didn't have such a sefer like Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. We had the Levush, which was too much explanation. But nowadays, the needs of today's generation is to have a sefer which tells you the actual halacha, what to do. And therefore, the sefer we're going to learn is from Mochen Al Hashem Lubavitch, and it's supervised by Rabbi Garari from Cholon. And the Rebbe himself gave a bracha for this sefer, for this book that we're going to learn, that they should put it together and they should print it out. To say just the halacha of not the opinions and not the just the actual halacha, and quoting the language of the Alter Rebbe in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and in a place where explanation is needed to give the explanation. But the purpose of this sefer we're going to learn is that everyone should know the halacha, what to do, whether you're big or small. Everybody could learn and find a place. And the Rebbe writes a letter that I asked many people to do such a thing, unfortunately, to make such a type of sefer. Unfortunately, people didn't heed the call as much. That people shouldn't have to look around from place to place. Should find one simple place to learn the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch with all the explanations. So in this sefer, as much as possible, uses just the language of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Any additions will be in parentheses. Right? So, Mir Hashem, when we learn the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, I think we'll be going a little quicker. We'll be going in depth.
Excuse me, said any addition will be in parentheses?
Yeah, it's not part of the actual, meaning any addition which you need to know, which is not part of the actual Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, they add it in as a parentheses or a footnote.
That's already in the sefer.
Right, it's already in the sefer.
How many volumes?
It's one volume, one short volume, and it goes through just the halachas that are pretty much practical. We'll be starting off with the mitzvah of honoring Shabbos. Could you get a non-Jew to right? It's many shiur, many classes, but we'll go through just the actual halachas. Could you hire a worker? And we'll go through all the halachas of preparing for Shabbos, Shabbos meal, Kiddush. What?
The Shaver, mainly around Shabbos.
Yeah, just on Shabbos. Just it takes the Chelik Beis Al Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Have copies, multiple copies. Has nekudas, and we can follow along all inside over here as we're doing it. So that we're going to stop over here.